The things that you've heard today, I think, will sit with you for a while, and then they will sneak up on you. Because I think we have been given the gift today of existential thought and existential challenge, but also hope, and an existential hope we have for our children, not knowing what their future holds, but knowing that we can be part of giving them the gift of being able to embrace that opportunity in hope. So, not wanting to hold all of Stan's time, of which I do, we have some roving mics, and we do hold some time for questions because we want you to have.
Please do. I love hearing questions from the audience.
So if you do have one, put your hand up, and we'll just make sure the mics are posed, because it's a full room. We could not squish more people in today, and we're so delighted to share this conversation with you. But I want to take a step back to something that you mentioned at the start, Stan, which was, again, we as many leaders in this sector are responsible for guiding systems that either create hope or hold hope back from children, young people and families. The thing that's kept me up is we approach solutions that we need for the future, or we approach the future with all the solutions that we hold from the past. Can you unpack that a bit for us?
Yeah, I think it's one of the dangers is looking to the past to answer the problems of today. I studied physics when I was at university, and one of the great lessons of quantum physics is this thing called retrocausality, where the future actually determines the past. Mathematics, the wonderful thing about mathematics is that the equations work equally validly in reverse. So time that we see as an arrow that moves forward, which is, I don't want to bore you with a physics lesson, but it's about entropy. It's about the second law of thermodynamics that says if you drop an egg on the floor, it shatters, it doesn't come back together again. You go from an ordered state to a disordered state. That's what we experience in our movement through time, which gives us a sense of our own aging. But actually time itself doesn't move at all. And I think I say that conceptually because I do think conceptually. I like thinking. I like going into the deep end of the pool and thinking very deeply about things because it does give me a perspective. And one of the laws of the universe are the laws of uncertainty, are the laws of retrocausality, as the idea that time doesn't necessarily have to be an arrow that moves forward. And so one of the follies of humanity is continually looking to the past to answer questions of tomorrow, when in fact the world has already moved on. And that's my point about the 21st century not actually beginning. It's 1979, over and over. Iran, China, Russia, America. It's the same story. Donald Trump's not new. My God, 20 years ago I was reporting George W. Bush, who lied about weapons of mass destruction to create a war in Iraq that gave us ISIS. I mean, he lied. And we joined up to a war of a lie. That's forgotten now because we've got Donald Trump, and Donald Trump's going to take up. Have we forgotten Richard Nixon, the bombing of Cambodia, Watergate? Have we forgotten, the Reagan-Iran-Contra deal? These things are not new. And we continually think that the world has been born again for us. But actually we're haunted by these things of the past, but the answers are not there. And I think one of the problems, and if you're dealing with at a policy level, is that we're always dealing with insufficient data. We're always dealing with the things we know rather than things we don't know, and we seek to systematise things. This is a very difficult thing for you to conceptualise in a policy setting where you do need to have guidelines and procedures, but actually trying to incorporate an idea of uncertainty, to create space in policy for human beings to exist, to be able to return to people who are grappling with the daily struggles of life, the capacity to deal with those things. And here's just a very simple example. When I was a boy, Aboriginal families would often take in relatives, family members. We'd step up when someone was having problems, and if someone was negligent in their responsibilities, we would step in and make sure they knew that. My great-grandmother was raising great-grandchildren in her 80s. uncles, aunties, took in cousins and nephews, and I had my mum's younger brothers and sisters living with us. We didn't have anything. We were squeezing into one bed and knocking on the church for food relief. But we held this together. If someone had come along with a system and asked questions, are you going to school? Not often. How many times have you changed school this year? 4 or 5 times. Do you have your own bedroom? No. Do you have your own bed? No. If someone came along with a checklist, I'd have been taken from my family. But it would have been disastrous for me. The worst thing in the world. So be very mindful of creating policies that may come with even the best of intentions, that actually remove the uncertainty, that leaves space for human beings to live with the messiness of their lives and the love that they can bring to the messiness of their lives. Because that's actually the world and the universe we live in. They are the principles, they are the universal laws that govern our lives.
And I think building on the conversations we've had is where we aspire, and everyone in this room aspires to deliver and contribute to positive outcomes, to the aspirations that we have for children. We invest in their possibility by making policies that predict the probability of the outcomes that they will face.
Yeah, and not knowing that people are not measured in that way. As I said, there is nothing in my life that would have determined that I'd be here or would have done the things that I was lucky enough to do. A lot of things had to fall my way. And I would actually say, despite the money that is now spent, despite the programs that are in place, I would wonder if it is in fact possible for an Aboriginal kid, as I was at the age of 5, 10, to have seen their life go in the same trajectory. I really wonder. There are a lot of Aboriginal people graduating universities now, a lot of Aboriginal people working in bureaucracies and so on. But quite often they're people who are second or third generation people who've enjoyed opportunity, an Aboriginal middle class. But to take someone who is, if someone changes schools 14 times before they're into high school, if someone isn't sure that, that they will have a meal tonight, or they'll have to pack up in the middle of the night and move, do you really imagine they're going to be sitting in the Oval Office with Barack Obama? Do you really think they're going to be in the Great Hall of the People in China, or watching history turn in South Africa? Or I really wonder about that. So what are we doing? And one of the things that we know in Western industrialised countries, there are so many people who are simply who are simply redundant. There are so many people just left by the wayside. And you need no more evidence of that than the United States, where the postcode that you were born into will determine the length of your life. If you're born poor, you die younger, and you die poor in the richest country on earth.
There's always a lot of conversation about the dreams that we have, and kind of to a lot of your foundational work around kind of the Great Australian Dream. We hold this dream for our children of what's possible for them. We kind of set them on a path. But often, kind of listening to you speak, it's that it is our dream for them based on our awareness of what's possible for them.
Yeah.
How do we, and how can, in terms of your experience, your thoughts, your insights, what can we take away that might actually reposition our thinking around how do we plan for a future possibility for children that we ourselves are uncertain of, but not hold them back with only the possibility of what we know?
Well, in terms of creating a world, a better world for our children, there is no doubt my parents bequeathed to me, in material terms, spiritual terms, a better world than the one they were brought into. I'm not sure that we can say the same about our generation for our kids. Yes, technology, yes, some opportunities, but are they really entering into a better world? I'm not sure. And And I think part of it is to accept, one of the things I've had to accept with my own children is that they understand this world better than I do. I understand the world I've come from, but their capacity to navigate, just simply to navigate the technology of this world, dwarfs my own. You know, my youngest son has created this media company online, which is just astonishing. I mean, I didn't even know it was even possible. But he's so astute, he's bright, he's able to use the technology. He has an audience of millions around the world. He's really building a very, secure future for himself, and he's pursuing his dreams in ways that I couldn't have imagined. So that's just one example of where sometimes we need to get out of the way, and we need to accept that they're wise in ways that we are not, and they understand this world in ways that we don't. And part of our world, I suppose I see this in terms of being an elder, part of being an elder is to sit with the wisdom that is handed down to us ancestrally, and to bring that wisdom to help inform and guide our children, who are then capable of building a world for themselves, but not to go out there and to map that world out for them, because in so many ways they're going to be better at doing this than we are.
Wonderful. Now we might open up to some questions from the floor. Can I check to see? We have a few questions pre-canned, so I'll be guided by those holding the microphones.
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Statistics tell us that we have never had greater rates of mental illness, especially amongst young people, ever. And I think there is one statistic I read, 40% of young people in Australia reporting some form of mental illness, psychological illness. And part of that reflects the fact that we are so connected and yet paradoxically so isolated. And I think that's part of technology. Technology removes the connection to the human soul. You know, part of the sort of technological revolution that came from the Industrial Revolution was to master time, was to give us a new idea of time. And human beings became measured, their worth became measured relative to time. You know, the billable hour, how much your labour is worth. We even talk about this in our language, to spend an hour. You know, and I think in what technology has done is it's changed our relationship to time. I always say this to people, you know, how can you have a healthy society when I live in a world of Uber Eats and Married at First Sight? and I say this, I mean, it is a bit sort of, but I say this in all seriousness. I can order, I mean, food is not just food. Food is the essence of life. I have met people, I have broken bread with strangers who are no longer strangers. One of the great experiences of reporting the world is to sit there with ordinary people having a simple meal and sharing in their lives, breaking bread with them. You know, I'm a Catholic, I go to Mass every weekend, and one of the wonderful things about Mass for me is the Eucharist, is the breaking of bread and the bread and wine and the flesh and blood, and the idea that you create a space for someone else. That's what food does. Food tastes better in communion, in relationship with another human being. And yet today, I can order a pizza, have it delivered to my house, having never looked into the eyes of the person who prepares it, having touched the hand of the person who delivers it, with a motorbike helmet on and gloves on, and then sit down with my cardboard pizza and turn on a television program, which is the most popular program in Australia, right? This is what we choose. This is what we choose to watch. Human beings humiliate themselves for the most precious thing a person can give to another, which is love. Now, if that is our world, if that is what we choose to do, if technology has given us convenience over love, the inability to break bread with a human, to mock and laugh at another human being's desperation for love on a television program, then I wonder, we have to wonder, why do we have such catastrophic rates of mental illness? It starts with those choices. Technology can be a wonderful thing, but when it turns us into slaves of technology, when it dehumanises us, when it stops us breaking bread or loving another human being, then I think we've got a problem. There's a guy, Toby Walsh, who is a futurist and does a lot of work around AI. Are you familiar with Toby's work? And I was talking to Toby about this one day, and Toby said, in the future, nurses will be more valued than doctors because robots don't get tired. They haven't had an argument with their husband or wife the night before. They're not coming in a bad mood. Performing surgery done robotically is going to be much more efficient and much more accurate, but is in care, in the human touch that we will come to value. So I think you're right to identify that, and I would hope that part of the blowback against AI is that we do value the human things. But I do wonder about that too, if we lose the value of that. If a painting done by a robot is worth more than a painting done by a human, I think it's a very short step to not even valuing a human who provides care for you. And the other thing to remember is, we've been through this as a family in recent years, and we're still going through it with elderly parents and care. Who does the care? Who does it? The people who are doing it, my father-in-law who passed away just late last year, and we'd had to, go through this whole process with him. He was being cared for people who were paid the least, who were spending 2 hours on public transport to get there to work, who were coming from the Pacific Islands or Southeast Asia, immigrants who were doing the heavy lifting of love and care because we don't do it, because the rest of us have just outsourced that. And how difficult it is for families to be able to provide that care, because we've got skyrocketing real estate prices that most people can't even afford to buy a house. We're having to work 2 jobs, 3 jobs, just to be able to keep up. We're tired, and we simply don't have the time to care for loved ones. So technology then fills the gap of efficiency, which separates us from the human touch. And we're doing that in our lives every single day. So we do need to look at these things holistically. We do have to hope that part of the blowback against technology is to value the human touch. But I also say that see at the moment that we are losing the human touch precisely because of the demands that technology makes on us, which outsources care, outsources love, and is done by the most vulnerable and least paid and least valued in our society. Well, I think I've got some thoughts more broadly about, I think what you're talking about can be applied to so many things. Scapegoating becomes part of the culture of fear that media engenders in us. I worked in media for 40 years, and I saw the peaks and troughs of that industry, and I was a participant in it, and I was as guilty of the shortcomings of it as anyone else is. But I was always aware, in the best of my reporting, that I did not lose some perspective and context and humanity. But part of the changing business model of news, part of the proliferation of news, most people get their news now from Twitter, TikTok, Facebook. They're not getting it from the nightly news. They're not reading newspapers. Readership is at an all-time low. The business model is changing. Is that in response to that, media companies, journalists ramp up the fear. So there is a gangland shooting or there is an outbreak of youth violence somewhere or youth crime. And you hear about that constantly. And it actually ignores the fact that the statistics may be telling us that it's never been lower. But we ignore that because all we hear is the constant hum of catastrophe and conflict. And that's become very much a media narrative. I think part of our age is to, and I think this again is very, very, it's an important role we play in our care for children. And my children were fortunate to grow up in a very media-savvy household, with my wife and I being journalists, but is to be discerning and to be critical of the media that we consume. No one has to watch the nightly news to know what's going on in the world, seriously, because you won't know from that. You'll know all the bad things that are going on in the world, but you won't know what's going on in the world. We don't need to be saturated by media. We don't need to be plugged into our phone every time there's another alert, going in and seeing what the latest media report is about X or Y. One of the things that I've done since I left doing Q&A, and I'm trying to sort of detox myself really from so much of that, is to just not watch as much, just not to consume as much. I'm much better informed. I'm much less anxious. I have a broader philosophical view. I'm reading different things. I have time to read different things because I'm not adrenalized. I'm not constantly engaged. I'm not plugged in all the time to that endless catastrophe that you get from news, which leads very much to the fear that you're talking about and the blame. All the migrants are to blame for the problems of the United States. Oh, really? But the top 1% have 950 times the wealth of the bottom 50% combined, but it's the migrants' fault? That's the media. Donald Trump, yes, excessive, yes, chaotic, yes, but really, he fits within the rogues gallery of so many of the worst presidents we've seen in the United States. The wars of our world, this is the worst we've ever seen. The World War, really? We've had World War I, World War II. Sometimes it's good to just step back and reduce that anxiety and be more discerning and critical and not feel so adrenalized that it doesn't, stimulate the hypothalamus, which leads us to that fight or flight instinct. So there's an outbreak of youth crime, and then we're meant to be scared of every kid that walks past us. Just be able to sit back and see this in a broader context and disengage from that highly adrenalized media. I think more broadly, there is, and look, it's always difficult with this to immediately go to the extremes, and you see extreme narratives now of toxic masculinity on one side and incels on the other, and this. But I think none of us live in that world. We live in the real world where we're having to negotiate and navigate loving family relationships that are under enormous stress and strain, and just the demands of being able to survive each day, keep up with the bills, pay the mortgage, be there for your kids, be attentive, and where the roles, where those parenting roles now lie. It's very different to when I was a boy, and my father was just struggling to survive, really having to go out and work all day to come home to a meagre meal and hope that we keep food on the table and just keep the family afloat. Certainly my father didn't. I don't recall getting any sort of fatherly hugs or sitting me on the knee and giving me father knows best advice. He taught me how to box and throw a punch and kick a football at best. But these things have shifted a lot, and the expectations have shifted, and rightly too. That we do need to have a different approach to the way that we parent. And my father was often a very distant figure to me and hard to get to know because he was under so much stress and strain. And I think today one of the good things about women being more represented, and look at the women in the room here today, and the minister, and is that has been able to change the way that we see caring roles and the relationship that we have to that. One of the blowbacks of that is that, and I hear this a lot from men and younger men, where do we fit? Who are we? What is it to be a man now, when those traditional roles that my father or grandfather may have occupied are no longer there? In Aboriginal society, these things are very delineated, and relationships that are ceremonial and structural and traditional that do have specific roles is really a foundation stone. I think in the West, things are much more liquid, things are much more fluid. And so out of that, there's an uncertainty about where those lines are and how a man might participate in that. So it's very important now, when there are so many bad models for that, the toxicity, the blowback against women that you see in the worst of toxic masculinity, that men who can honestly say, I don't know, and we're trying to work this out, and where are the spaces for men to come together and talk about these things, and where are the examples of men who may not necessarily be just fathers, but teachers and friends and uncles. And I was really lucky to come from a culture where my uncles were also fathers, and they were really important in giving me a sense of my place in the world. I think it's very difficult now. It's very difficult to define those roles and to model those roles in the ways that are healthiest and most productive, and for men and women to be able to negotiate that and navigate that, to be able to find places for each other that are distinct, different, and also necessary. Well, certainly, with all respect to Tanya, who I love dearly, it's not necessarily in politics. Politicians, look, they have a hard job and they have a wonderful job, and they do, the best of them are phenomenal. And you got Tanya and her, not just commitment in politics, but before politics, and what drives her, what gets her up every day. And there are good people, on both sides of politics, all sides of politics in Australia that I've met who embody that. But if we look to politics for that source of hope, we're going to be lied to. Barack Obama talked about hope and change and yes, we can. And then when the global financial crisis hit, who did he bail out? He bailed out the banks, and he bailed out the bosses of Morgan Stanley who worked in his office, who funded his campaign, and ordinary Americans lost their houses and they've never got them back. So be very careful when politicians start to speak about hope, because that's really not what hope is. W.E.B. Du Bois, this African-American scholar, like in the sort of 20th century, he talked about seeing his first son born, and he looked on the face of his son and he saw all of his history in this face, and this little hand reaching out for him. And he said that he saw a hope, not hopeless, yet unhopeful. And I suppose that was how I saw it with my mum and dad. We're not hopeless, but we're not necessarily hopeful it's going to get better, but we turn up. We turn up. That's not politics hope. That's not yes, we can hope. That's a hope that with all our best efforts, it still might not be enough, and that is enough. And I saw that in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq. I saw it in every part of the world that I reported from, China, from just little bits of hope. And it surprises us. I was in North Korea. And when you go to North Korea, it's so secretive. You've got a minder with you all the time. And it's hard to explain to people how isolated North Korea is from the rest of the world. And this man was a beautiful man. He was my minder. It was his job to basically inform on me if I did the wrong thing. And I was sitting down one day by the river with him, and he loved music. And I asked him about the Beatles. He'd never heard of them. And he was a musician, never heard of them. But anyway, we got talking, and he's living in this repressive regime where he's told to be fearful and hateful of the West. And they won't allow the Beatles in because they may lead to a revolution. And yet, when he talked about his daughter, it was like me talking about my kids. And I saw this everywhere. And that's where hope resides for me. I'll just leave you this little story, right? My mum and dad who, they could not afford to not be hopeful, right? I mean, a lot of people talk about this now. Oh, hope, what does hope mean, Really? Well, you must have a very full stomach, because I've seen the greatest hope in the people that have nothing to eat. So it's very easy to be a nihilist and to dismiss hope when you've got a full stomach and it just becomes an academic exercise. Oh, isn't this clever? Well, my mum and dad didn't have that option. And they fought the good fight. And they didn't win all the battles. And life was just getting by. And because of them, I'm here. And my mum and dad now, Dad's old and we still have him, thank God. But he has to be helped every day out of bed, into the bathroom. He's up maybe 4 or 5 hours a day and then back to bed again. And my mum's, she's shrunken and she's old but here they are. All the battles fought and won, and here they are, still there together. And every night before my mother goes to bed, she gets 2 cups out and she puts a spoonful of coffee into each cup and she fills the jug. And then she goes to bed, and I used to always think, why does Mum wake up in the morning, make the coffee in the morning? And I think, oh, no. I know what she's doing. This is what she's always done. You go to bed, you're thankful for the day, you prepare yourself for the next day, and you hope that the next day comes. And she hopes that my dad will get up and she'll still have him the next day. And that little cup is the cup of hope. And if anyone wants to say there's no hope in the world and think it's smart to dismiss hope, go and live like my mum and dad have. Thank you.
Now, I've learnt that next year we're going to have to put some tissues on the tables as well. That'll be a good learning for us. What an incredible morning. We've had the gift of Jamali and probably one of the best welcomes and funniest welcomes that we've had. A federal minister who has set such clarity of direction, but also reminded us that plans don't equal outcomes, and it's the translation that gives outcomes. And the absolute gift that is Stan, and the gift that he will give you tonight when you are having a sleepless night thinking about Stan. I would like you to join us now as we take a break. We go get to enjoy some food together, and as Stan has promised, it tastes better because we'll be eating it together. So thank you for the morning.
Thank
we
you.
look forward to joining you in the afternoon.
Cheers.